All right, guys, this is going to be our last little video for our ecology. Did all the notes. You've got all the notes that we were going to do for this chapter that we could do without being in class. And the last little thing you're doing in the last packet that you got sent today or you picked up is on biodiversity. And biodiversity is, again, right there it says the greatest natural resource that we have. It leads to lots of things. And if we go back in our notes and we look at our little picture of the Earth and we had our Arctic zones, our temperate zones, and our tropical zones, biodiversity gets a little bit less as we go to our poles because of some of those other diversities they talked about in your reading, like ecological diversity. Ecological diversity gets a little bit lower because we don't have those, stable temperatures and weather patterns, again, as we move to the poles. So biodiversity is a big deal. And this last little bit, I like to spend a lot of time on this. This is a lot of where our ethical stuff comes in. That Thinking Like a Mountain article that you were to read through on Leopold also leads into this. Because when we get down to threats on biodiversity, there tends to be a lot of focus on number 2 here, human activity. But being scientists, we also know that there are natural changes. There's geological changes, climate changes, and we do recognize those. Again, you hear this on the news all the time. It's politicalized. A real scientist, there's not one real scientist out there that doesn't know that climate change is happening. It happens all the time. It's something that's been around since the Earth has been around for 5 billion years. Okay? Geological time, and climate change happen over vast periods of time. Geological is much longer. I mean, we can get into astrological. We can say, hey, well, what about when the meteorite struck the Earth? And that was the end of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago. Yep, things like that can happen. Okay, those mass extinctions, that we talk about in human activity, because we always kind of link it to humans, can also happen naturally. They do occur. Okay, so biodiversity is a big deal on lots of levels. So we got geological change. I mean, go back and look at our map of when we went from Pangea to the 7 continents that we have now. You don't think that affected organisms during that time? It sure did. It caused extinctions, okay? Climate change has happened many times. We've had ice ages. We've had hot periods of time. In one time, the entire Earth turned into a giant snowball almost, except for near the equator at the time. Life almost ceased to exist on this planet as we wouldn't be here taking notes, okay? But then we get to human activity. Humans, because we can actually understand what we're doing around it, and we can actually conceptualize that with our little brain, we actually do affect the environment quite a bit. We can do that in a number of different ways. And how we can do that is, first and foremost, our last chapter is dealing with population. So I'm going to get rid of this top part here, and we're going to just talk about some of these human activity changes. Okay, and I got to grab my notes too because I've all changed these around a little bit. So, first and foremost, I do want to talk about population. Okay, I mean, it's a big deal right now with this virus thing going on. Right now, there are 7.78 billion people on this planet. We think that the top end of the planet can hold is somewhere between 10 and 12 billion people. So we are going to get to that limit. And how did we even get to this limit? It has to do with human activity. Okay, and we'll talk about that here in a moment too. But we're at 7.78 billion people. I don't know, about 8 years ago in class, we actually hit 7 billion people in my ecology class. It was kind of fun that day. We were watching the clock. And you guys can go on the internet and look up the clocks and see what's going on with that. It's kind of fun to watch what's going on there. So population plays a big deal in this because remember we also looked at, we had S curves and we had J curves. And we talked about population. Boy, that's a J curves. An S curve is logarithmic growth. That's what we like. We like to see, hey, we got to our carrying capacity and we're happy. J curves are where we just take off. This is where our population is at. We're on this J curve, okay? And eventually we are going to reach a peak. Things like this little pandemic that's going on right now. Yeah, because we have so many people. We have people moving around. Viruses move around very quickly. They kind of give us a link into, all this social distancing and things like that. How do we do this? How do we go around it? How can we keep doing what we normally have been doing? It alters the way you have to work. So population is going to play a big role in all these human activities. Okay. The first one that we want to talk about, and again, I'm just going to kind of go through them really quick, is altering habitat. Okay. Altering habitat comes in lots of different ways. That's building a house. That's building a town, making a bridge, building a dam. Okay. Agriculture. Those are all things that can alter the habitat of the animals that used to live there. So it does change that. Okay. Altering the habitat has increased, by the way, our population. Without being able to do agriculture, without becoming industrialized, our population wouldn't be anywhere near where it's at right now. But that's because, as humans, we learned how to understand how the environment works, to manipulate it so we can make more food in an acre than used to be able to be made in that acre 100 years ago and 100 years before that. We can get better and better at it. So altering the habitat, yes, humans can do that. Okay. Second one I want to do really quick is when we alternate habitats, we introduce pollutants. Make sure I spell P-L-L-O. Pollution. Let's just put pollution on there. Okay? Pollution is something that gets introduced because we're breaking things down. We're burning things up. And pollutants lead to something called biological magnification. And this is a term that you hear coming up all the time, and it's something you should definitely know what it means. Biological magnification means that a lot of pollutants, they're usually heavy metals and things like that like to stick to proteins. And what happens is that when they get absorbed within the food chain, we've talked about food chains, you get a little particle down at the bottom of the food chain. And so all of these individuals down here have each one little particle. But when you go up the food chain, all those particles now get condensed into one organism. And then these organisms get ate by a larger organism. So now we keep getting these pollutants all in. So we started out with 4, we went to 2, now we have 1. The pollutants tend to not leave the system. So that's what we talk about biological magnification. Things like DDT. We talked about that in class with the bald eagles. Yep, DDT was a great, and we've even seen it come back to get rid of bed bugs now. But in birds, it doesn't kill the bird, but it does affect their eggs. It makes their eggs so fragile that when they sit on them, they break. And in the early 1980s through the late 70s, we thought, our national emblem was going to disappear. They've come back. We've taken DDT out. It's still in the system. You can go to California and you can still see articles on that. You ever read them this year if we'd had class? That, yeah, DDT is still out there. We still got to worry about it because it's part of the system. We thought, hey, we have a great insecticide, but we didn't know the ramifications of it. That's another thing that we're doing as humans are learning how to work within ecology. Another one is demands on wildlife. Demands on wildlife. Some of this is from just hunting and fishing. Okay? Just hunting and fishing. That can reduce population numbers. We see that with fish right now, especially things like tuna, stuff like that. Within our state, it's on certain wild species that are native to our state, like cutthroat trout, stuff like that. Those are demands on wildlife. Other demands on wildlife can come from cultural backgrounds like rhino horn or bear gallbladder, stuff like that. People go out and say, hey, they take out these animals, they take the gallbladder, that's all they take. But in some medicine, it's supposed to give you, it's supposed to make you feel better. That, we know scientifically that doesn't work, but still that is followed by certain cultures. So that has huge demands on wildlife, which can, again, lead to extinctions. Then we have demands on wildlife. Then we also do this as humans. Introduce wildlife. Both plant and animal. Don't always get stuck with talking about animals. But we introduce wildlife. And we do this again to either improve our demand for food, okay? For instance, in Montana, and you heard me say this a couple times during the school year before we got zapped, that, hey, most of the trout species that you may think are native to Montana are not. Brown trout, brook trout, lake trout, and rainbow trout do not live here naturally. There's one spillway in the very western part of the state that has rainbow. That's it. So we introduced them, and we call these. Excuse me.
Sorry, UPS came.
Come here. Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. We introduced wildlife, and if some of these species, they fit right in there just perfect, such as the pheasant. Ringneck pheasant came from China. They fit into our environment great here. They fit into a niche that wasn't occupied. They filled right in. Not a problem. Okay. Other species have become problems. Spotted knapweed, Canadian thistle. Those all came from Europe. Those are plants, but they're here. In Australia, they have trouble with toads and was it toads? And they brought in something else. I can't think what it was. Camels, but they fit in. Camels would be like our example of a pheasant here. But we call those species that start to cause problems invasive. Okay, they are coming in and they're actually pushing out the natural groups of or populations that are there. In the Wolf Mountains, right below Hardin here, south of Hardin, we have a small cutthroat trout population was found in the Wolf Mountains, and right now they're trying to protect that. They're trying to keep the brookies from getting into them and pushing them out. Brookies are invasive. Okay, so we have all of these things that can threaten the habitat, but remember, we also can conserve it. Humans are great at conserving. So even with all of these things that we do that are negative, we can conserve. Okay, we do conservation. So that article on thinking like a mountain, this one that you guys are reading right now on bighorn sheep. This is nature versus nurture. Okay, this also ties in a little bit more biology, so it links you back to your biology class too, talking about genetics. But this is a way of conserving our animals, trying to help them out. How do they interact? Because we do have populations that have probably interrupted their migration patterns. How can we help get around those? In the western part of the state, we have big natural bridges for the elk and things to go over the top of. Okay, we do those sort of things. So let's not just always focus on humans being the bad guys in a lot of these impacts. We also need to remember that humans do a lot of conservation too. In fact, let's talk about the lumber industry. The lumber industry cuts down the forest, but they also plant the most trees of anybody. They help reestablish those forests. They've learned from the past not to cut down everything. Okay, whereas in third world countries, we know that people there are not following those situations. They're actually slash and burning their whole forest. That's where the rainforest stuff comes up out of Brazil. So remember, we do conserve. Okay, read through your articles, get those things turned in, and that is it for our year-end ecology. So get that stuff turned in to me as soon as you can. That's it.